This anime begins by showing Imperial troops who were expanding the territory. They arrived in a village where the Gale tribe lived. The Imperial forces led by Priest Druk came to launch an attack as the Gaelic men were going hunting. Even so, Priest Druk was a little surprised because the village atmosphere was much quieter than usual. At the same time, a girl named Rhiannon appeared. Priest Druk knew that Rhiannon was the descendant of the village head, so he intended to make her a sacrifice to raise the Demon King, even though he had been ordered to seal the Demon King's tomb because of a dangerous prophecy. However, Priest Druk planned to resurrect the Demon King and rule the world with him. Rhiannon refused his request, but he threatened to kill the 2 Gaelic boys he had found, so she was finally willing to go and follow him. Meanwhile, a young man named Arthur and men from the Gaelic tribe hunted in the forest. However, he was not as focused on hunting because he felt terrible. Sometime later, Arthur and the Gaelic men returned to their village. They then got a report from the 2 boys previously arrested by Priest Druk that Rhiannon was taken away by the Imperial troops. Hearing this, Arthur invited the villagers to save his little sister. They rushed to where Priest Druk was heading, and it turned out that Priest Druk and the troops went to a cave not far from the Gaelic village. Inside the cave was a very high ladder, and on top was the tomb of the Demon King. When Arthur and the villagers arrived, Priest Druk was about to begin the ritual of the Demon King's resurrection. Arthur and the Gaelic men engaged in the battle against the Imperial troops. At the same time, a mysterious light emerged from the center of the cave and spread throughout the forest. Shortly, there was the Demon King's spirit hovered above the tomb. Priest Druk greeted the Demon King while offering Rhiannon, the last descendant of the Elf King, as a sacrifice. However, he asked the Demon King for a reward to give him the power to rule the world jointly. The Demon King started walking down the stairs and transformed into a man named Aron. He kept walking close to Rhiannon, while Arthur, who managed to break in and saw the incident, immediately ran to stop. Arthur's coming surprised everyone, so Priest Druk asked him to leave and not disturb the ritual. But he refused because Priest Druk wanted to sacrifice his sister. Arthur then explained that Rhiannon was the village head's daughter, and anyone who married her would become the village head. Unfortunately, Rhiannon could not react or fight because she was stuck by the magic of Priest Druk. She was trapped in her subconscious, but Aron tried to interact with her through his ability. He then told her that if she didn't want to see his brother hurt, she needed to wake up immediately. Rhiannon managed to escape the influence of Druk's magic and regain consciousness. Aron then killed Priest Druk. After that, Arthur came up to Rhiannon and drew his sword at Aron. She tried to stop his brother, but Arthur didn't care and continued to duel with him. But Aron praised him instead because of his ability to match him as the Demon King. Shortly after, Rhiannon stood in Arthur's way to attack Aron. Her action confused Arthur, but she insisted that she wanted to marry Aron and make him the village head. Arthur got annoyed but did nothing because it was her decision without coercion. When they were about to return, hundreds of living skeletons surrounded them. They couldn't help but fight and try to escape. But there were still too many living skeletons that put Arthur and the others under pressure. Luckily, an old man named Ogum appeared and showed the secret path. Arthur and Aron already knew Ogum. However, it turned out that the living skeletons also surrounded the hidden way, so Arthur and Aron again fought against them. Aron got hurt because he was still weak and was resurrected prematurely, causing his power not fully to recover. After some time fighting against the living skeletons, Arthur and Aron finally reached outside and were welcomed by the villagers. After the incident, Arthur decided to lead the rebellion to the Empire. Meanwhile, in the Imperial Palace, a man named Gaius got a report from his men saying that the Priest Druk had been killed trying to raise the Demon King by kidnapping Rhiannon, the village head's daughter. At first, he thought Arthur had killed Priest Druk, but he was told the Demon King was the killer. Gaius' men then said that the Gale tribe decided to rebel because of the incident, but Gaius emphatically said that acts of rebellion could not be forgiven. He traveled to Aron Island, where the Gale tribe was. One night, Arthur invited the entire villagers to leave Aron Island and move to a more prosperous Albion. All villagers cheered and prepared to go. Meanwhile, Aron is suddenly attacked by a girl named Morgan, and they fight because of a misunderstanding. Even so, he could easily defeat her. Shortly, Arthur went to see them and asked what was happening. At that moment, Morgan seemed sorry and apologized. She failed to carry out Arthur's order and lost the ship they would use to set off for Albion. Arthur was disappointed and wanted to punish her but was prevented by Aron. He advised Arthur to make a plan rather than punish her. He also insisted that Morgan was now under his protection. Arthur agreed to that and planned the ship's recapture. The next day, they went to the harbor and saw their ship guarded by the Imperial troops. Ogum said there was no point in seizing the ship because the gate to the high sea was closed. Seeing that, Aron asked them to split up. He, Arthur, Rhiannon, and Morgan will take care of the gate, while Ogum and the others will take the ship. Ogum launched arrows at the enemy to pave the way. After overcoming the enemy, Aron's team successfully opened the gate, and now they just needed to return their ships. At the same time, Gaius appeared, clapping his hands, praising Gale's clever strategy. Aron, who saw Gaius, asked Arthur and the others to leave while he and Gaius started talking. Gaius asked if Aron was the Demon King who would destroy the world, but he replied that he had no intention of doing so. Hearing that, Gaius took the sacred knife from his robe, threw it at Aron, who could easily deflect it, and threw it back at Gaius. It surprised Gaius, so he again asked what Aron's purpose was. Aron replied that his purpose was Regius, the shining star king in heaven. Gaius thought that Aron's goal was power, but he denied it by saying he was targeting the king's way. Gaius did not understand the words, but Aron reconfirmed that he would find out. At the same time, Arthur and the others came with the sailing ship. Aron jumped into it and left Gaius. In the middle of the voyage, Aron realized that his hand was injured by Gaius' sacred knife. Ogum healed Aron with magic, explaining that Gaius was attacking him with an electrum. Ogum also reminded Aron that he had previously died of electrum. After that, Aron asked what had happened to the last great war. Ogum then explained that since the kingdom of Albion found, mankind has become more prosperous. But after hundreds of years, the kingdom of Albion became divided because of Aron's ally, King Albion. He was an elf named Puel, who lost his bloodline. Therefore, the kingdom of Albion is now experiencing an endless civil war. In the evening, while Aron was relaxing on the deck, Arthur came and asked him to sword fight. They both fought for a while until Arthur lost. After that, Arthur asked Aron to promise always to protect his little sister. After sailing for a long time, the Gale tribe reached the island of Albion. They docked, explored the forest, and rushed to the palace of Avalon, King Puel's palace. After a long walk, they reached the palace gate. Seeing from outside, the entire castle of Avalon looked like a ruin. But when Aron opened the gate, the situation inside was much different from outside. They met two female elves, Limris and Ermin, who knew Ogum but did not know Aron very well. But only King Puel and Demon King Arawn could open the gate of Avalon from the outside. Ogum also said that the man who came with him was Aron, the Demon King, and Arthur and Rhiannon, who were descendants of King Puel. Afterward, Arthur and his entourage explored the magnificent palace of Avalon, as it would become their new home. Aron and Arthur then went into a gun room and found all kinds of good weapons. But then, they suddenly couldn't move their bodies due to the magic used by an elf woman named Epona, who thought they were both thieves. Knowing that Aron and Arthur were the Demon King and the descendant of King Puel, Epona apologized and unleashed her magic. In the afternoon, Arthur and the others went to the beach to hunt many jumbo crabs. After having dinner, they all rested. Gaius sailed for Arthur and his entourage in the middle of the sea but lost track of their ship. Therefore, he decided to dock to the nearest city, the largest trading city in the empire, Londinium. The next day, Arthur and Avalon's people began practicing martial arts in case of war, but the weapons in the palace were still very lacking to be used by all people. In the afternoon, Arthur and the men of the Gale tribe went hunting in the wood, and they realized that there was someone else in the wood. While relaxing around the bonfire, they met a musician and a traveler named Taliesin. He played music for Arthur's entourage, and he left and warned them afterward that a band of bandits controlled the forest area. The next day, Aron suggested they go to the city of Londinium to get the needed things. They sailed for the town and arrived there at noon. He explained that the Empire bought all its goods in the city and planned to seize them while they were shipped. In the evening, Arthur prevented the people from taking the Imperial goods and reclaiming them. Arthur and his entourage then left, but he and Aron realized the coming of the Imperial troops. They fought them and captured a warrior, even though he managed to escape. Arthur and Aron examined the goods and found that they were just sand. They knew they had been framed and ended up coming home with nothing. The next day, Aron, Ogum, Arthur, and the others returned to the beach, intending to search for jumbo crabs. At the same time, a mysterious figure appeared from the surface of the water, and Aron seemed to recognize it. It was a girl named Lear, who was the water elf. She was ordered by her people to greet and help Aron. They started catching jumbo crabs, and at the same time, Aron found the seal pelt. He then took it and found Rhiannon, who was having trouble lighting the fire. He handed over the seal pelt to her to fire up. In the evening, Lear wept over the loss of her seal pelt. She couldn't go home without her seal pelt. When asked what her seal pelt was like, she said it was made of seal skin. Aron was shocked and felt guilty for burning her seal pelt. He confessed and apologized, but she smiled and promised to follow him instead. With Aron accidentally burning her seal pelt, she could not return to her people and had to stay with him. According to Lear's tribe, any male elf that takes the female elf's skin will be their husband. The next day, a group of Imperial troops discovered the remains of Gaelic equipment in the forest. Their leader was planning to ambush the Gale tribe, but it was not approved by one of his subordinates, a girl named Octavia, who reminded him that their job was just to stake out, so they had to get back. But the leader wanted to be rewarded and capture the rebels, so they kept looking for the Gaelic people. News of the Empire legions coming also reached Avalon. Arthur and his men were preparing to make an ambush and had set some traps for the Empire troops. When the troops arrived at the designated location, Arthur gave the signal for action, and at the same time, the trees were fallen and trapped the Imperial forces. A fierce battle occurred in the forest, but the Empire's legions were desperate to outnumber. Octavia told the troops to flee until they crossed a wooden bridge, but a warrior cut off the rope of the bridge because of panic, so some fell into the river. A few days later, Aron and the others went to the city of Londinium to see a prestigious martial arts competition. At the next match, the monster that was going to fight was a girl named Rathy. All the audience felt confident that she would lose in no time, but their predictions were wrong because she turned out to be able to match her opponent's strength. Ogam then explained that Rathy was a mining elf and the miners were very strong and experts in forging weapons. In the end, Rathy defeated her opponent, but she was surrounded by bodyguards, creating a hole in the ground to escape. When she got out, Ogam and Aron were waiting for her. They also asked why she took part in the tournament. She replied that she wanted to get the Sylvanus steel medal that was the tournament's prize. The medal was so valuable for the mining elves that she tried to get it without having to mine it. After that, Aron invited her to join him to forge a weapon, but she wasn't sure of Aron yet because she didn't think he was a good person. Even so, she followed him and sat in the audience with him and Ogam to watch. In the next match, it turned out that Octavia fought her troop's leader. The fight began, and Octavia appeared to be able to master the battle and be a winner. But her troop's leader, who didn't want to lose, used a tricky method of summoning a group of warriors to ambush Octavia. Her troop's leader did plan to kill her, but Morgan suddenly showed up in the arena and helped Octavia. The two girls then massacred the ambushed troops. It didn't take long for them to win the game. On the way back, it turns out Rathy secretly followed Aron and the others. Ogam and Aron stopped to see her. She began to recognize Ogam and asked about the rise of the Demon King, who, according to rumors, was dressed in black, had sharp eyes like wild beasts, and carried a red sword. However, when she saw the man next to Ogam, she was surprised to realize that his characteristics were exactly the same as the person who invited her to join earlier, namely Aron. Ogam also said that the person she was talking about was already in front of her. Upon learning that, she prostrated and apologized for having rejected Aron before. Aron again asked her to join as his subordinate and would get the job of forging weapons for their troops. The next day, the Empire sent Rubiramu troops led by a girl named Lydia. Rubiramu was a mighty group of elite warriors. They were sailing towards Albion Island and arrived by nightfall. Aron and Arthur have known the news of the arrival of Rubiramu troops, so they both set up a strategy to fight for them. Ogam warned that their opponents were strong, well-trained elite troops, though few in number. But Arthur was overconfident and underestimated the opponent. Arthur led the legion and surrounded Lydia's entourage in the woods. The fight began and turned out not to be what Arthur thought it would be. Rubiramu legion was powerful and formidable. Even though they were only made up of a few men, they could hit back against Arthur and his troops. Realizing they had almost lost, Ogam created magic to separate Gaelic and Rubiramu legion. When returning to Avalon Palace, Arthur seemed to feel guilty because many warriors were injured by his carelessness. Aron beats the desperate Arthur and tells him to get back and fight, despite losing an early battle. At the same time, Rathy showed up and said that she had a plan. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Legion's base, Octavia went into a room because she smelled something suspicious. When examining a chest, she found a bunch of bodies inside. At the same time, there appeared a warrior ambushed her. The troops turned out to be Lydia's men. There it was seen that the two girls already knew each other, and Lydia hated Octavia very much because she had once been defeated by Octavia. After that, she held Octavia in a crate and left the base. Meanwhile, Arthur and the Gaelic warriors followed Rathy, who was very good at digging holes quickly. She dug an underground tunnel, so Arthur and the others could get into the Imperial warrior base without getting caught. After paving the way to the surface, Arthur and the Gael tribe troops acted discreetly and began to pick up some crates of food supplies belonging to the Empire's warriors. While examining one of the crates, Aron found Octavia being held captive, but Aron closed the crate when Arthur arrived. After that, they fought the legions who were aware of their existence. Arthur and Aron could easily defeat them. When they wanted to leave, Ogam called Aron and showed him the crates containing the bodies. The two couldn't help but wonder what the Imperial was up to collecting corpses. Not only the bodies of the warriors they found but also those of civilians. Even so, they didn't have much time to think about it and were left with stolen goods while burning down the Empire's Legion base. On the way back, Ogam and Aron met Lydia, who was surprised to learn that their base had been attacked and burned. Upon arrival at Avalon, they found an empty chest, and Aron realized that Octavia had escaped and was hiding somewhere. Afterward, Aron returned to talk to Ogam about the bodies the Empire kept. He had a guess about what all the bodies were stored for, but he didn't dare think about it any further. After that, Aron found Octavia hiding in a deserted warehouse, and they fought. But he realized that she had hurt herself, so he lost interest in fighting people who didn't have the spirit of life like Octavia, and soon after, she passed out. The next day, Octavia finally woke up and realized that she had been treated and looked after by Rhiannon. Afterward, she walked around Avalon and saw Arthur practicing the sword. Octavia then criticized Arthur's movement, but he was upset and disliked her presence, thus challenging her to fight. At the same time, Rhiannon showed up and prevented them from fighting while saying Octavia had not fully recovered. Rhiannon then took Octavia away from there and accidentally met Morgan, who was very happy to see Octavia again for fighting together in the tournament the other day. The next day, Octavia was seen teaching swordsmanship to the two boys from the Gaelic tribe, and Arthur watched her from afar. Afterward, he took Octavia for a walk. He wondered why nobles like her didn't want to be royal guards. Octavia then said that she hated the Empire even though her father was a rebel, so the Empire slaughtered her family. Arthur was confused as to why she was a warrior, but she said that the royal troops were innocent and the guilty were their superiors. Therefore, she wanted to eliminate the seniors by joining forces as royal troops and carrying out a coup. Despite hearing Octavia's explanation, Arthur still couldn't accept her, so the next morning, Arthur came to her to fight. A few days later, he began to suspect her because she was caught going into the woods several times and meeting with Imperial warriors. Morgan, who didn't believe the news, secretly followed her at night, and Octavia went into the woods and met the Imperial soldiers. The next day, Morgan met Octavia, who was training the two boys from the Gaelic tribe. But when Morgan asks, Octavia doesn't answer anything. She instead invited the two boys to continue training. She then told them never to leave the palace. But the two boys went into the woods, and one was captured by the Imperial troops. Hearing that, she went into the forest, but she was blocked by Morgan, who pointed an arrow at her. After explaining the situation, Morgan lowered her arrow and wanted to trust her. They went to the forest and met the warriors led by Lydia. During this time, Octavia turned out to warn the Imperial warriors not to disturb the Gaelic. After taking the boy to safety, Octavia told Morgan to return to the palace and summon their friends. But Arthur and the others showed up, and they'd been in the woods long. The battle occurred in the middle of the forest while Lydia and Octavia fought near the cliff. Octavia finally managed to win the fight after slashing each other. The next day, Rhiannon was seen looking for mushrooms in the forest, but she met Gaius, who was also on patrol, so she was captured by Gaius and his troops. Arthur, who heard the news, was very worried, but Aron asked him to remain calm. Aron prepared to go to bed, but it upset Arthur because the situation was precarious, but Aron was going to sleep. Ogam explained that Aron was meditating because his heart and Rhiannon's were connected so that he could find out where Rhiannon was. Meanwhile, Gaius was meeting Taliesin to find out about the Gaelic. But Taliesin did not provide any helpful information at all. On the other hand, Rhiannon was being poorly fed tasty food, and suddenly, there was a commotion outside. Knowing there was a wounded warrior, Rhiannon went to see him and treated him with magic. After that, Rhiannon cooked mutton curry for all the troops, and because the cuisine was delicious, everyone was happy. Gaius then went to Rhiannon to have a conversation, and he became interested in Gael's group fighting for hope. In the evening, Rhiannon spoke to Taliesin on a hill. They both seemed to talk a lot. At the same time, Aron calls Rhiannon through his subconscious, making her walk unconsciously away from the Imperial warrior base into the jungle. The warrior asked her to stop, but Rhiannon ignored him, so the warrior was forced to drop an arrow. On the other hand, Gaius, who saw it, asked his troops not to shoot Rhiannon, but he was late, and the arrow stabbed the Taliesin's shoulder. The man came out of the forest and returned the arrow to Gaius, while Rhiannon managed to escape and meet Arthur and the others in the woods, then returned home safely. A few days later, Aron called a meeting and thought that Gaius would soon invade Avalon with great force. Realizing that they would not be able to defeat Gaius and his troops, Aron and his comrades also decided to seek help. They remembered Taliesin saying that bandits were occupying the forest. The bandits were the Brigantes tribe which, according to Ogam, was one of the elves tribes that inhabited the forest. They also planned to go to the Brigantes to make an alliance. The next day, Aron and his comrades traveled until they finally arrived in the forest belonging to the Brigantes. But they were besieged by a troop of Brigantes led by Taliesin. Aron then said their purpose was to meet the chief of the Brigantes tribe. Taliesin replied that the leader had died and there was no successor because there was a prophecy that the next chief tribe would be involved in the dispute and killed in the battle. Therefore, no one wanted to risk becoming the chief of the tribe. Even so, Aron still wished to continue his journey, but Taliesin stopped him, so Aron challenged Taliesin to a one-on-one duel from each group. Arthur came forward and faced Taliesin, who represented his group, but he felt the fight was unfair because Taliesin was still injured after saving his sister yesterday. But Taliesin still wanted to fight, so Arthur went alone for a while before fighting. When he left, Taliesin had a conversation with Aron and said a rumor about the man who had always been with King Puel, but the man disappeared when King Puel fell. Taliesin explained that the man was dressed in black, then asked him about the man. But Aron wouldn't answer Taliesin's question, which he showed for himself. Shortly after that, Arthur appeared and was ready to fight. Both of them drew swords, but Ogam felt that there was something strange about Arthur. He also noticed and thought Arthur was a fool, and eventually, Arthur lost. Taliesin was initially upset because he felt humiliated by Arthur, who purposely injured his own arm, to be fair. After Arthur explained everything, Taliesin finally praised his decision to act like a real man. After forming an alliance with the Brigantes, Aron invited Arthur and others to return to Avalon. Sometime later, Aron held a meeting again and said they were short of money. Therefore, they would look for Aron's treasure buried in his tomb. They made preparations and departed for the location of Aron's tomb. They were astonished that the tomb was so grand and vast upon arriving there. Aron opened the entrance to the tomb and invited them to walk through the room. Inside, there were magic dolls who served as tomb guards. Arthur and the others fought against the magic dolls and defeated them. Shortly after, they again encountered an obstacle, the rampaging giant orc, but Arthur and the others managed to win by teaming up. They finally reached Aron's tomb, where Rhiannon suddenly saw the shadow of Aron's past. Aron had been close to a girl named Maiden. He even made a coffin next to him so they could be buried side by side. Shortly, the shadow slowly faded away. On the other hand, when Arthur took some of the treasures deposited there, he noticed a mysterious painting on the wall. Arthur was surprised when he saw one of the figures because Arthur's father was killed by an angel, similar to the figure in the painting. In addition, the figure was also very similar to Aron. Meanwhile, Gaius was meeting the Imperial senators to protest because they did not send enough men and weapons to fight the Demon King at Gaius' request. However, the attitude of the Imperial senators, who did not seem serious in responding to the Demon King's problem, was motivated by the report of a messenger who turned out to be secretly monitoring Aron since his coming up. The messenger said that Aron was not the Demon King but an ordinary young man. Therefore, the Imperial senators considered Gaius to have failed and even threatened to fire him from the royal army. He left the Imperial senators' room with disappointment. He was distraught with their decision and suspected that it was all Aron's strategy to disguise himself as an ordinary young man so that the Empire would not regard him as a powerful enemy. Arthur and the others planned an attack on the enemy base and departed as soon as the preparations were complete. In the middle of the journey, Arthur and his comrades passed through a dense forest and arrived in a creepy region. He decided to stop because the area was covered in white fog. Soon, a swarm of undead appeared that directly attacked them, so Arthur and the others fought against them. Even though he and his comrades killed the undead many times, the undead could rise again. In addition, the fog was also getting thicker, so their vision became very limited. Ogam intended to use his magic power, but Aron prevented it because he had his own plan. Aron asked Arthur to buy time because he would cast a powerful magic spell. The fight continued while Aron began to create a magic circle and perform rituals. Shortly, a white light suddenly appeared, and the sky shone brightly with a light that then annihilated the entire undead. Ogam said it was the power of an angel, and everyone was surprised because they didn't think Aron could use the power of an angel when he was the Demon King. When they saw Aron's figure, they were all shocked because Aron had turned into an angel. Arthur remembered his past when he saw his father killed in the woods. He and his father once met an angel very similar to Aron, and that angel then killed his father. The angel also asked Arthur to hate and kill him one day. Even the angel said a name, and it turned out that it was Aron. Arthur, who remembered everything, drew his sword and intended to kill Aron. Rhiannon tried to stop him and defend Aron, but Arthur said that Aron had killed their father and Arthur had promised his late father to kill Aron. Unexpectedly, Aron came forward and took Arthur's attack while Rhiannon fainted from surprise. Aron then said that Arthur had kept his promise to his father. Arthur, who seemed to regret his actions, pulled a sword from Aron's body and Aron fell and was severely wounded. The news of the incident turned out to have been made known to Gaius. According to the reports he received, Arthur left after stabbing Aron, while Aron was still alive but seriously injured. Even Gaius did not waste the opportunity and mobilized his legions to invade Avalon. When his troops reached the gate, they began to attack and destroy the palace walls. Nevertheless, there was no sign that they would be able to break through the palace. On the other hand, Arthur fled to the forest and experienced a severe dilemma after what he did to Aron. He finally reached Aron's graveyard and met Ogam, who was waiting for him. Ogam also recounted his past about the dragon tribe that lived on the other side of the continent. He said that dragons exist, and he was one of them. Arthur did not believe Ogam's words because, from any side, he did not look like a dragon. Ogam continues the story that once the continent where the dragon lived was destroyed by the event of the sky collapsing. He referred to when the moon was crushed and fell on the entire continent. A long time ago, there were 2 shining moons in the sky, and one collapsed to destroy the continent where the dragon tribe settled. The Alaman, who was not on the continent, is now the only remaining member of the dragon tribe. Shortly after, Arthur heard an explosion from Avalon and decided to return, but Ogam said that his presence would not change anything. Ogam asked Arthur to go to Gorset Aron so Arthur could find the truth because, in that place, all races were united to fight together. After that, a group of goblins appeared and attacked Arthur and Ogam. They fought against all those creatures, and Arthur finally realized that Aron had always been helping him. But the goblins suddenly escaped, along with the giant door opening. A massive creature appeared behind the door, and Ogam said it was a dangerous Electrum Golem. Ogam turned into a giant dragon to fight the Electrum Golem and asked Arthur to leave immediately. The scene then turns and shows the Avalon that Gaius and his troops are fighting over. The legion of Imperial warriors led by Gaius managed to overwhelm Avalon. Gaius turned out to have asked for help from the base, and it was only a matter of time before reinforcement came. And when it arrived, the mentality of the Avalon warriors instantly fell, especially when the enemy was carrying a giant gate-breaking device that could destroy the gates in an instant. Gaius was increasingly convinced that the raid would soon be won by him. On the other hand, Arthur, who continued to run tirelessly, finally reached the Brigantes tribe area. Arthur then met Taliesin and asked that he be allowed to meet with the chief of Brigantes because Avalon needed a favor. Taliesin then asked Arthur why he was fighting, and Arthur replied that he was fighting for his friends. Taliesin, who was satisfied with the answer, then ordered the troops of the Brigantes tribe to gather and reveal that he was the son of the Brigantes chief, and now he was ready to lead the Brigantes tribe. Taliesin then ordered all the soldiers of the Brigantes to rush off to Avalon to help Arthur in the war. Meanwhile, Gaius finally broke through the first gate using a giant gate breaker. He then ordered the warriors to pass through the gates and conquer the Avalon warriors blocking them. Even though the battle was fierce, he was ready to break through the next gate and move forward because his goal was to take Avalon and become a king. Meanwhile, Arthur, Taliesin, and the Brigantes met with Ogam, who led the troops outside Avalon. They set out for a surprise attack. Meanwhile, Gaius again managed to destroy the gates and now leaves only one gate left to get to the palace of Avalon. There was a sudden attack from behind when he was about to destroy the last gate. He was surprised to see Arthur, who came with many soldiers. Even a simple situation would be unfortunate for him. Arthur shouted for Aron to get up and join him in the battle. Shortly, the last gate was destroyed from the inside, and the healed Aron finally came up. Seeing that, Gaius ran to attack Aron, but Arthur appeared and stopped Gaius with his sword. Gaius then recalled Aron's words that he was targeting Regius not for power to himself but rather for the power of a young king, and the king to whom Aron referred was Arthur. The battle was fierce until finally, Arthur defeated Gaius, so all enemy warriors declared surrender, and Arthur decided to keep the enemy soldiers alive, while Gaius chose to end his life honorably, having been amazed at Arthur's ability. Gaius' death was also made known to the Imperial senators. At the same time, a mysterious man showed up who resembles Aron. The Imperial senators recognized the mysterious man as the king's gardener. The mysterious man then said that the king was dead, then burned down the entire room the Imperial senators were in. The scene returns to Avalon. Arthur and everyone teamed up to clear the remains of the battle. After it was over, he asked Aron about their next opponent after Gaius was killed. Aron seemed to know their next opponent, so he invited Arthur to a meeting. But in the middle of the meeting, they got word that a mysterious man had killed the Imperial senators. Arthur asked who did it, and Aron replied that the culprit was their natural enemy and the man who killed Arthur's father. At the same time, they came back with word that the golem had been sent to attack Avalon. Aron planned to lure the golem army to Chorus Mountain to trap them with a snow avalanche. The next day, Aron and the others made their way to Chorus Mountain and continued to climb that snowy mountain. Aron and his comrades then explored a cave on the road to the legendary giant's house that was Aron's acquaintance. In the middle of the journey, Taliesin decided to separate because something caught his attention. In an alley, he found a giant batch of eggs, and one of them hatched, and a baby dragon appeared. The baby dragon continued to follow wherever he went and accidentally found a secret door leading to a room. He and the baby dragon entered the room, where he fell in pain when he saw the glowing figure in front of him. He was then shown a secret that had been kept. The scene then turns to the past and shows the 12 angels in heaven, confused because God created a new angel figure. An angel named Merlinus said they never knew God's plan, but he assumed that increasing the number of angels would cause trouble. Therefore, Merlinus was ready to take care of the new angel, who turned out to be Aron in the past. At that time, Merlinus named Aron after Lucifer, and from then on, Merlinus played the role he deserved for Lucifer. Over time, Merlinus taught Lucifer many things but did not educate Lucifer to think like an angel in general. In those days, the earth was plagued by the Ice Age, and all humans were entangled in divine magic and couldn't do much. One day, Merlinus asked Lucifer to come down to earth and walk into a cave full of piles of human corpses. They found a girl alive, and Merlinus freed her from the influence of divine magic. After that, he taught her how to make fire. Lucifer asked why Merlinus did that. He then replied that he wanted to turn the world into a better place. He wanted the Ice Age to end so that spring could emerge. Therefore, he used his ultimate power to change the world, but he had to lose his life. Lucifer returned to heaven to meet the other angels, who now number only 11. He, who is the 13th angel, will succeed Merlinus. But over time, he discovered that the angels re-implanted magic into people and caused them to suffer. Therefore, he freed the human as Merlinus did. He also decided to join the angels no longer, so he was expelled from heaven, and all his angelic powers were taken away. After being discharged from heaven, Lucifer changed his name to Aron. The scene turns to the present, and Taliesin regains consciousness after seeing Lucifer's past and knowing what he had to do. He then parted ways with the baby dragon and left the room. When he got outside, he saw his comrades struggling in the middle of a snowstorm. The golem's troops had also approached and threatened them. Taliesin came up to Aron and said he had a plan, but to do so, he had to beat Arthur to death. After that, Taliesin began to do what Merlinus used to do. He sang the Song of Creation, and suddenly there was an avalanche that destroyed the enemy troops at the foot of the mountain. But Taliesin was also killed for singing the Song of Creation. When the storm was over, Arthur finally woke up and was so upset with himself that he couldn't do anything that Taliesin had to sacrifice his life. Aron and the others had returned to Avalon and were leading a meeting to discuss the next steps. Arthur didn't come to the meeting because he was still devastated by Taliesin's death. Aron then said that he and Ogam would look for a legendary weapon while the others had to go to the Palladium and fight against the enemy troops. Aron intended to take Dirwin's legendary weapon at Gorset Aron. At the same time Arthur came there, he remembered Ogam once said that if he wanted the answer to his question, he had to go to Gorset Aron. The plans have changed. Aron and Ogam will lead the troops to the Palladium, while Arthur and the others will go to Aron's Gorset. The next day, the two squads departed and planned to meet again at the Palladium for the final battle. Arthur set out with his comrades and took a pretty long trip. They also reached the location of Gorset Aron, which turned out to be on a hill with several stones lined up to form a circle, and a sword was stuck in the rock. It was Dirwin's legendary weapon. When Arthur held the sword, a blinding golden light suddenly appeared, and he had a vision of the past. Huil, who was very similar to Arthur, met Aron for the first time. Aron was seen with a little girl who could talk. Humans should only be able to pray to the angels at that time. Aron then said that she had broken the magic of the angels. He then gave his Dirwin sword to Puil. The sword was mighty and could kill an angel if Puil knew how to use it. That's when they promised to continue to be friends. Both told each other's real names. Meanwhile, when Arthur held Dirwin's sword, Octavia and the others faced the besieging enemies from various directions. They had to protect Arthur until he pulled out the legendary weapon, while Arthur himself was still seeing events in the past. Puil, Aron, and Ogam were on the remnants of the devastation caused by the war against heaven in the past. Aron's hurt is terrible, and his life won't last much longer. Even so, their struggle will not be in vain because the world is entirely free from the constraints of the angels. After that, Aron asked Puil to stick Dirwin's sword into a rock. Turning to the present scene, Arthur pulled Dirwin's sword, and its radiance spread and annihilated all the enemies there. Arthur led his comrades to leave for the Palladium. On the other hand, Aron realized that Arthur had pulled Dirwin's sword. Arthur joined Aron and the others in front of the Palladium gate. They also managed to get inside and walk into a room. In front of them was a pole called the obelisk. Aron warned that the obelisk could endanger them if activated. At the same time, a burst of magma appeared from below, thus separating the group. Octavia and Morgan meet with the mayor of Londinium, Creon, in a prepared arena. The two girls were surrounded by golem troops, ready to finish them off. On the other hand, Lur and Rathi reached a place where the undead and monsters were created, and they both intended to destroy it. Aron, Arthur, Rhiannon, and Ogam met Priest Druk, who has been resurrected. Priest Druk then activated the obelisk to cause them pain. Arthur asked Aron and Ogam to find a way to stop the obelisk while he defeated Priest Druk. They parted ways, but Priest Druk was able to influence Rhiannon. At the same time, she met her former self, Primula, the girl Merlinus and Lucifer rescued. After interacting with Primula, Rhiannon gained strength and was freed from the influence of Druk. Meanwhile, Aron and Ogam reached the top of the obelisk, but they're not strong enough to destroy it. Elsewhere, Lur and Rathi were also threatened with harm as the monster creation furnace brought up an enormous number of monsters, while Octavia and Morgan are also getting overwhelmed because the enemy keeps coming. Arthur was still fighting against Priest Druk until he was exposed to the magic that kept his body in various magic circles and couldn't escape. At the same time, Priest Druk launched the ultimate attack, about to kill Arthur. But quickly, Rhiannon carried out a magic exchange so that the attack harmed Priest Druk. Nevertheless, the fight was not finished because the priest's body showed a terrible creature and threatened the safety of Arthur and Rhiannon. In front of the obelisk, Ogam turned into a giant dragon and attacked the obelisk with all his strength. At the same time, Aron's sword resonated with Arthur's. Both of them shared the power so that Arthur could finish off the terrible monster in front of him. They then gathered in the garden at the top of the Palladium and saw someone who seemed to be relaxing. Arthur went to the man he thought was an emperor, but when he got closer, it turned out that the person had become bones. At the same time, a figure who had killed Arthur's father and slandered Aron appeared. Aron knew that the figure that showed up was an angel named Lecter. Arthur believes that Lecter is the murderer of his father. He asked why Lecter killed his father. He replied that Arthur's father refused to tell him where Aron's tomb was. A whole generation of Puil descendants has always protected the grave, making it hard to find. Arthur got angry and tried to attack Lecter, but Lecter's body immediately moved to another place, and all the flowers there vanished and turned into skeletons. Soon after, Lecter raised an entire army of skeletons, so Arthur and the others fought directly against them. At the same time, the sky darkened, and lightning struck many times. The world is being shaken by the catastrophe presented by Lecter. Arthur stepped up to attack Lecter, but he was no match for Lecter, who was an angel. Arthur did not give up and scratched Lecter's face with his sword. Lecter was surprised that there was a human being who could hurt him. At the same time, Lecter aroused a disastrous monster, namely Brigantes. Aron was surprised to see the creature was still alive because, at the last fight, he thought he had defeated it. Brigantes instantly raged as soon as the Palladium was raised, and a moment later, the Palladium tower collapsed. But suddenly, a group of dragons appeared and saved Arthur and his comrades. Talionis turned up with the dragons unexpectedly. They all landed far away from the ruins of the tower. But suddenly, there was a terrifying creature much more enormous than Brigantes, which turned out to be the embodiment of Lecter that merged with Brigantes. The creature's attack could even destroy a mountain. Ogam said there was only one way to defeat the creature, with an ancient spell, and only Rhiannon knew and could pronounce it, but she did not remember. Aron will buy time until Rhiannon reminds it. The fight between Aron, Arthur, and the others against the giant creature began. On the other hand, Rhiannon did not need to know the spell. The situation was even tenser when Aron was severely injured while fighting, so she came to him immediately. Rhiannon, who didn't want any more victims, kept trying hard to remember the spell. She met Primula in her subconscious. Presently, she knew the necessary spells. Rhiannon rose up and began to cast a spell that sounded like a chant and instantly made the sky glow brightly. Slowly but surely, the giant monster began to disintegrate and reveal the figure of Lecter behind it. Aron and Arthur then came forward and tried to attack Lecter. Arthur jumped and stabbed Lecter, killing him. This anime ends by showing Arthur and his comrades returning to Avalon. After that, Aron crowned Arthur the king of the elves in Avalon and called him Pendragon. That's when Arthur became known as Arthur Pendragon, the king of elves from Avalon. The moral lesson we can learn from this anime is never to accuse before proof, and never to be rash in making decisions. Arthur is the image of a human in real life who often makes mistakes throughout the story, but he keeps trying to fix his mistakes and tries to be better until he succeeds in becoming a king.